UN Security Council meets on the crisis in Venezuela. Caracas rejecting a European ultimatum to hold elections within 8 days, as Mike Pompeo says all countries must now pick a side. 34 dead and hundreds missing after a mine collapses in Brazil. The company in charge hit with a fine of $66 million and ordered to halt some of its operations in the country. And tributes pour in for the French composer Michel Legrand, who's died at the age of 86. The 3-time Oscar winner made famous for writing hundreds of film and TV scores. Good evening and thanks for joining us this hour here in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Nadia Massi. Our top story for you this hour: the UN Security Council has been meeting today on the crisis in Venezuela. In a series of heated exchanges, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called on world leaders to formally back opposition figure Juan Guaido and denounce Nicolas Maduro's government, while the Russian envoy at the table responded and accused the United States of trying to orchestrate a coup in Venezuela. Nonetheless, several European states have signalled they are willing to follow Washington and support Guaido's incoming administration. Well, for more then, let's take a listen first of all to what Pompeo had to say.
We hope that every nation will join us in recognizing interim President Juan Guaido. And we hope, too, that each of those nations will ensure that they disconnect their financial systems from the Maduro regime and allow the assets that belong to the Venezuelan people to go to the rightful governors of that state.
Let's discuss the story now in a bit more detail and bring in Pascal Drouhard, an expert on Latin American affairs based here in Paris. Good evening to you. We just heard there from Mike Pompeo at the UN Security Council. Clearly some tensions at the UN today, but how much does that politics affect the chances that Juan Guaido will actually leave power in Venezuela?
Well, in fact, all is absolutely political today in Venezuela, and of course on the international scene. It is a little atmosphere as the Cold War period, in fact, and we can see that in the UN Council. In fact, we are all, and all the countries are very committed to avoid violence and more violence, because Venezuela today is with this large crisis, the crisis of violence, of security, of migration, of economy. So all the elements are on the table for large crisis, and it is no interest for no one. So definitely we could see in the UN today Council what happened, but definitely all the allies of Nicolas Maduro, as Russia, China, Turkey, also, but also all the countries who are supporting Juan Guaido today are looking. Also, of course, the EU, European Union, are looking to avoid a strong violence crisis today.
What about the situation then inside Venezuela? It does seem, at least for now, Maduro has the support of the army, which presumably means it's much more likely that he will be able to stay in office.
Well, in fact, we can see that the high commander of the army are, of course, supporting the President Maduro, but we could see the 21st of January that the level, other level of the army are not so sure to support Nicolas Maduro. That's why Juan Guaido talked about an amnesty. That's a very strong message to the army, the amnesty to whom will support him.
And he's clearly been really strongly backed by the United States. Now, they've talked about the need to isolate the Maduro regime, particularly financially, but they haven't got around to sanctioning the oil industry. Why not? And do you think that they will?
Well, you know that one of the stronger economic partners of Venezuela on the oil sector is the United States. So for sure that's one point, but I think that's one way of for sure to control more the Venezuelan regime today.
All right, well, thank you very much for your analysis and your time. Unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it there. Pascal Drouhard there talking to us on that situation in Venezuela this evening. Next, then, there has been a potential breakthrough in talks with the Taliban aimed at ending America's longest war. The White House representative Zamali Khalilzad met with Taliban leaders in Qatar for 6 days, and both sides said headway was made there. Taliban sources telling the Reuters news agency that a draft peace deal includes plans for foreign troops to withdraw from Afghanistan within 18 months. Now, that plan hasn't been officially confirmed, but the negotiator Khalilzad is now en route to the Afghani capital, Kabul, where conversations with the Taliban are to continue. Well, covering this story for us from Kabul is our correspondent Bilal Sawari, and he joins me now. Bilal, first of all, what do we know about this prospective deal?
Well, Ambassador Khalilzad has written on his Twitter that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and everything must include an intra-Afghan dialogue and a comprehensive ceasefire. We understand that the Taliban are negotiating from a position of strength. They control more ground and territory than ever before. And they always demanded, remember, that they wanted to talk to the Americans face to face, that they want an end to the invasion, that foreign forces must leave Afghanistan. Now, we also understand that these talks for 6 days were some days 12 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours. So the parties have begun to know each other quite closely. We understand that some trust building is there. Now the Americans have to come and brief President Ashraf Ghani and Afghan politicians. Remember, this is a very different Afghanistan than the one that the Taliban ruled. So you're talking about minorities, about women's rights, about media freedom. And this will be a big and lengthy process. But if we have a comprehensive ceasefire, if there is a peace deal, then that will be welcome news. Remember, this country is bleeding. Afghan civilians are caught in this conflict in the cities, in the countryside. And Afghanistan lost 45,000 members of its security forces, according to President Ashraf Ghani. Now, that is coffins in villages, families losing their breadwinners. So the expectations among the Afghan people are quite high, and I think there's a thirst for peace in this country, at least from the point of view of the ordinary Afghans.
Yeah, there may be a thirst for peace, Bilal, but clearly there are significant challenges to actually getting this deal signed.
There are. Number one, some Afghan officials are already saying we are looking at how this ceasefire can be ensured, because the previous ceasefire was a short-term ceasefire. So you're talking about Taliban fighters walking into the cities with their guns. You're also talking at the local village, district level revenge factor here, commanders on both sides, especially from same tribes and families and villages sometimes. So there's that. There's also the issue of counterterrorism. The Americans want the Taliban to give guarantees that there will be no threat posed from Afghanistan to the outside world, I assume America included, and I think that's a clear reference to the 9/11 attacks to Al-Qaeda. Now the question is, can the Taliban really physically take on Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State and other foreign fighters who are here? The deputy head of operations for the Taliban, Rajdin Haqqani, has had a historical and generational relationship with foreign militant groups, including Al-Qaeda.
Right, Bilal, keep watching that story for us. Thank you very much indeed. Bilal Sawari for us there in Kabul. Next, 34 people have been confirmed dead after a dam collapsed at a mine in southeast Brazil on Friday. Nearly 300 other people are missing, all of them employees of the mine operator Vale. Now, the company is the world's largest producer of iron ore, and it's been told to halt some of its operations in Brazil. Well, more than 24 hours after the collapse, rescuers are still searching through the mud, but hope is fading that more people will be found alive. Catherine Osborne is at the scene for us.
Families of victims of the tragedy have been gathered here at this emergency response center, where they're getting attention from medical professionals, from psychologists, and even from public defenders. Those are helping people who have lost their homes find temporary housing and eventually calculating the damages of all of that. And anxieties really are high. It's a slow rescue process. The mud is getting firmer where people are potentially trapped. And so families are getting very, very slow news today.
If it's written already found, it means that the person is well, that we've spoken to him or her. If it's written not found, it means that we're still looking for the person, getting in touch with his or her family and friends to try and find them. Everything okay? This list here is also on the Valley website.
Oh Lord, please release my son. I can't stand it anymore. For the love of God, please help me.
My wife was working over there, in the restaurant. I haven't had any news yet. The only thing I have is hope. And an aching heart. That's it.
As the human costs of this tragedy are still being calculated, the monetary consequences for Vale, the mining company, are already starting to pile up. A judge has ordered the company pay over $250 million for emergency response immediately. The government has declared 3 official days of mourning, and activities at the mine have been frozen. That's all while the number of victims is still being determined.
Catherine Osborne for us there. Well, finally then, tributes have been pouring in today for the French composer Michel Legrand, who's passed away at the age of 86. He was a prolific composer, writing over 200 film and television scores and picking up 3 Oscars and 5 Grammys in the process. Well, let's leave you for this bulletin then by taking a listen to some of his celebrated music.